Hey everybody, it's Leslie Tagorda, your brand navigator, designer, and astrologer. We're here today for a special midweek bonus episode, Astrology for a Revolution. You may or may not know that I have been a brand designer and strategist for over 15 years. But it's only when I started using astrological insight was I able to create really meaningful results for my customers, aligning to their divine gifts, aligning to their purpose, and amplifying their brand voice using their natal astrology. Well, in today's bonus episode, I wanted to highlight some of the history and alignments that are happening in 2020 based on a workshop that I gave last week. In this powerful workshop that I delivered on our full moon eclipse in Sagittarius last Friday, I hosted a workshop for social impact and transformational impact leaders. We were looking at the multitude of seismic shifts in 2020 based on the stars and what this all leads up to. If we look at history and we look at the current events, there is no doubt that we are in the beginnings of a revolution. Now, I don't need to tell you that, obviously, the current events of the time, but the astrology is really supporting this quantum leap in social evolution. That's the best way I can say that. So in today's bonus episode, I'm going to give you the recap of the astrology of 2020 from a historical perspective, as well as what this pivot point mid-year with these three eclipses, we're right in the middle of the summer eclipse season, what this all means. So if you want to listen to the whole workshop, you can purchase a replay or become a Patreon member at the Thought Leader Luminary level. Our Patreon is a new offering that we have. During this replay, we're going to be focusing on one part of the entire workshop. And this part is about the timeline of 2020 and how it relates to past historical events. If you want to purchase the entire replay, you can purchase that on my website, thesavvyluminary.com/revolution, or you can become a Patreon member at the Thought Leader Luminary level. The workshop comes with all of the slides. The slides have the astrology timeline. It has 4 steps to raise your voice in your brand values, and it has house by house full moon activations. While the full moon is now past us, this is still helpful to really look at. So if you're interested in the full workshop, again, you can go to my website, thesavvyluminary.com, or become a Patreon member at the Thought Leader Luminary level, and you'll get access to the slides and the full replay. But for now, I hope you really enjoy the highlights from Astrology for a Revolution, where we will look at the timeline of 2020 and show how we are just at the beginning of a revolution. It is time. Please enjoy. So again, I'd like to make this an open conversation. So anytime anybody has a question or wants to chime in or anything, please feel free. So what we're going to be covering today is we're going again to be looking at these cosmic shifts of 2020, putting it all together, because again, we're right smack dab in the middle of the year. And what does it mean knowing that we've seen all these shifts in the beginning of the year and we have these other shifts that are still coming up? We're going to look at a little bit of history to see what it has to teach us, right? Because otherwise, if we don't look back at history, we keep on making the same mistakes. And history is showing us that this cosmic shift is really a time of revolution, reformation, however you want to look at it. We're going to be looking at, of course, the astrology of the eclipse season, meaning the here and the now. And at 12:12, when the sun and moon are exact, at the exact full moon, I have my alarm set a minute before so that we can take a bit of silence. Okay, a little bit of silence, a minute and 20 seconds of silence to just kind of feel and see what comes up. I don't know where that's going to happen in the flow of things. So I just kind of put it there. Then we're going to really look at re-examining our brand values and our beliefs, because because like I said, I am a brand astrologer, and our businesses are extensions of our own consciousness. um, how do we then wrap our personal values and our brand values into our brand and really get them activated in there so that we can take a stand, step into our own power, and really raise our voices in empowering ways? And then, of course, we're going to jump into a little bit of astrology, depending on how many people are here, how many people want to share their charts. I have not run any charts. I have some questions that are going to go house by house to get you really curious about what you need to know, what you need to really inquire about yourself with this full moon eclipse. All right. Any questions so far? All right. So here we go. Time to speak up. Time to use your platform. So all of us are here because we've been called somehow as to become a transformational or a social impact leader, right? Sometimes we call light workers, we're called healers, we're called teachers, right? And for whatever reason, we've been called into this because we really want to change the world. But as you already know, as social impact leaders, we all know that to transform the world, it starts with transforming ourselves. And it's not just this one-time thing that we transform ourselves. The cycles of astrology actually tell us where we need to re-examine in our lives. And this 2020 is a life of re-examination so that we can really be that light worker that inspires, like really from this place of authenticity to change the world. Instead of just saying we're the light workers, we're becoming and being the light workers. So one of the things that probably I had no idea that this was gonna go so far. So on Instagram, I don't know, earlier this week, I think on Tuesday or something, I posted just this simple quote from a writer and thought leader, Rachel Cargle. She is amazing if you haven't found her, because I kept on hearing these different words in the social context of racism and social activism, of all of these things that I didn't even know what they were. And so one of the things that came across my mind was spiritual bypassing. And I'm like, what is spiritual bypassing? I think actually I found spiritual bypassing through looking up centering, because I was hearing this word centering come up so much in this term of like white privilege and white feminism. And I was like, what is this centering? And so I came across this article by Rachel Cargle that she posted in 2018 in Harper's Bazaar. Is that right? Yeah, Harper's Bazaar. And so at the end, I have some reference lists of just kind of the links that I'm referring to and articles that I'm referring to. And this stuck out to me so much, the spiritual bypassing. It stuck out because it defined this kind of like nebulous thought that I've always had in my head. And it defined something that I've also caught myself doing at certain times, right? And so what Rachel says is that there's a spiritual bypassing is the easiest way for white women, and it's not just white women, let's just say, to skirt around the realities of racism is to just love and light it away. When confronted with ways they have offended a marginalized group with their words or actions, they immediately start to demand unity, peace, and painting those they harmed as aggressive, mean, or divisive. Okay. So I've made this mistake before myself, and even in my Facebook group, there's people who are not just white. There are people of color who are doing this, and to kindly call people out and say, actually, this is called spiritual bypassing. This is what it is, and this is what's wrong with it. So I wanted to start with this because for whatever reason, when I posted this on Instagram, it took off like wildfire. Like I'm not somebody who normally has, like I haven't yet had a viral post yet. I say yet. Um, but for whatever reason, the last time I checked, it was liked over 500 times and shared just as many and saved, all because of this quote that Rachel Cargle wrote. right? So obviously this is resonating with a lot of people, either in the recognition of doing it or recognizing other people doing this. There's nothing wrong, there's nothing bad with making mistakes. It's just like, what are we going to do then to be responsible for our mistakes, right? And it was really interesting because like on Instagram, I had my first like commenter fight. And Kathy, like I remember our business coach was saying, you know, if somebody's not getting pissed off at you, you're not doing it, you're not saying anything important. Right? Anything right. So I was like, woohoo, I had my first internet fight. I witnessed it rather, and had to then create the safe space for all of the opinions to be served, you know? So anyway, so what we're going to be doing today as we look at the astrology of 2020 and as we look at the astrology of now is that I want to explain that I don't use astrology as like this predictive tool saying, Joanna, you're going to have a great year next year. Suzanne, this year is going to be really hard for you. Like we're already experiencing those things. It's like, duh, yes, we know, but why? Why, right? And so I always love to think of astrology as like there's like some like bigger time lord than just like the Saturn and Jupiter people, Jupiter energies, like moving all of these different dials, right? And all of these dials have their own periods and cycles, and when they come into alignment or when they go all over, we're using all of these dials, like the grand puppeteers moving all these dials and asking us when the astrology pings at certain times to drop a question into our mind, right? What does the cosmos want us to know? How does it want us to evolve and change? Because we're not static, right? And using astrology as I forgot who wrote this, but this is not my words, the signifier, not the cause, right? Using astrology to be mindful, to notice and really hear, listen to the energies. Where do we need to get curious? Where do we need to pay attention, both collectively, right? Because the transiting energies are happening to all of us. And then where does that happen for us personally in our own charts, right? And then, of course, looking back to history to recognize past patterns so that we hopefully do not make the same mistakes. It's always a powerful year, right? Because astrology is not like this definitive thing. It's like we have a hand of cards to play, and we have the personal free will to decide how we're going to play those cards. All right. So here is this big chart. So just to let you know, so what I did just recently is I started charting out all of the astrology of 2020. So at this very bottom, we have the outer planets and they're kind of the way that they dance in the sky and that they come together throughout the year. So if you have been following astrology at all, you know that we started off with our big Saturn-Pluto conjunction in January, okay? Now, Saturn is the planet of authority, of discipline, of top-down structures. So like corporations, governments, authority figures, like those, that's one expression of the energies. And this happens every about 33 years. They come into connection, okay? Then we have 3 Jupiter-Pluto conjunctions. And the reason why they come in threes is because Jupiter, from our perspective, and Pluto are going forward, then they take a step back just because of the cycles between the Earth and these outer planets. So they meet in the sky 3 times. The first one in April, the next one coming up while they're in retrograde at the end of June, and then the next one at the end of November. And these 2 planets also meeting. This doesn't happen very often. I think this happens, I'll tell you the details of how often this happens, like every 20 something years or something. I can't remember off the top of my head. For the astrologers in the group, feel free to chime in. And then the last conjunction of the year, now Saturn and Jupiter conjunct at the very end of the year in Aquarius. So we're mostly activating with these outer planets. These are like our social planets, and Pluto is like way out there. Pluto is the energy of transformation and huge power shifts. It can also be fear and phobias if we look at it that way. But I don't know if you notice, uh, I'll show you later when I come back full on screen, but I have Kali Ma behind me. Joanna, you and I were totally on sync about like what is the goddess energy coming out right now, and Kali Ma, the destroyer and the creator, right? This year is a year of destroying and creating. And so Jupiter, the planet of expansion. So I'll talk a little bit more about these things. And then Saturn and Jupiter, when they conjoin, that happens about every 20 years. Now, okay, so every 33 years, every 22 years, every 20 years or so, no big, huge deal, right? But normally we would have one of these kind of meetings in the sky once every 2 years, once every 5 years or something in a regular pattern. But in 2020, we have three of these like cosmic shifts. So it's like one shift on top of another, just like blowing up. So when we think about, I'll go into each of these shifts, but when we think about like, okay, social unrest and like the world is on fire, on top of a pandemic, on top of like shelter in place, all of these three things just like showing us in the sky, right? Then we have the astrology of the now with today is the 5th, June 5th, with our full moon eclipse. Then in a couple of weeks, we'll have our new moon eclipse and then a full moon eclipse. Why this is special is that normally the eclipses come in twos, but for this year, it's not completely rare. It's out of the ordinary. The eclipses are coming in threes. So it's again, triple threat, right? We also just had a nodal axis change. This happens every 18 months. So it's just like, it's not like any of these things are so different on its own. What makes it so impactful is that all of these shifts are happening right now. Okay. Let me know if this is hitting, if you have questions, because I could be talking a lot. And then we have summer solstice, the midway point of the year in the northern hemisphere, summer solstice in the southern hemisphere, and the winter solstice. At least in the northern hemisphere, if you work with nature spirits or if you're a gardener, you feel the momentum of the full light of the sun. Everything is in full burst. And it's the earth, like literally all of the energies of the earth just coming out into full force right in the middle of this, right? On top of it, you can see our Mercury retrograde cycles. Mercury retrograde happens 3 times a year, no biggie, even though we feel it a lot. I'll be talking about that because we have one coming up. I'll be talking about that next week. The Mercury revival guide, not survival guide. We also have Venus retrograde, Mars retrograde coming up. Now, again, these retrograde cycles for Venus and Mars, they happen every 2 years or so. Saturn and Jupiter, they spend half a year in retrograde, and I don't have it in here, but Pluto is also retrograde right now. So at this exact time, we have 5 planets in retrograde, which just means that we have to re-examine the meaning of those energies collectively as a society as well as individually. I think it's amazing. So we'll go over this kind of like timeline again. You don't have to memorize or anything, just kind of get the feel for all these shifts that are happening. Does this look like a revolution to you? Even if you don't really know anything about astrology, I have a pod of 3 different families, and we were talking about our next steps for preschool. And there's all of our children didn't have spaces in the preschools that are available with the new guidelines with like small classes and stuff. And so our pod is putting together our own little homeschool. So we had dinner last night together, and one of them is a scientist, my husband's an engineer, and I was like, you guys, you gotta look at this. And even they like total disbelievers of like astrology were like, holy smokes. Some of the big energies that I want you to just kind of get accustomed with, I look at the zodiac signs as like cosmic archetypes, and there are several archetypes that are coming into full force this year. We have the Cancer Capricorn archetype, and these two archetypes, they work together in like polar opposites. And then we also have the Gemini Sagittarius archetypes, and I'll be talking about these different archetypes. But to realize that all of these signs, we're always expressing all of these signs in our lives in certain aspects, and they have a spectrum of vibration. They can either be expressing themselves as low vibrations, or at the highest level, of course, this is where we want to move to, right? Like I said, astrology, it's not destiny. It's just like you have this energy that you get to play with right here and right now. So why Cancer and why Capricorn? So all of those conjunctions that we were talking about with these big outer planets, the ones that move really, really slow through the zodiac and bring about change, they were all focusing in Capricorn, all hovering around the 22 to 25 degrees of Capricorn. At the lowest vibration of Capricorn, we have corruption, we have authoritarianism, we have controlling. So you think about like police brutality, you think about like government restrictions, you think about like corporate corruption. Like all of these things are at the lowest vibration of Capricorn, right? And so when you have like these two planets of Saturn that is represented by Capricorn, Capricorn is ruled by Saturn, and then it meets Pluto, the big blower upper transformation, powerful transformation. When they meet up in the sky, I look at this as like this house of cards falling. And then the opposite of Cancer, opposite of Capricorn is Cancer. Cancer is normally, you notice Cancer is like the ultimate mother, the ultimate nurturer. And actually Cancer, the United States is Cancer, July 4th. It's born during the Cancer season. And there's a lot of things going on with the United States astrology, but I'm not going to talk about that here. But it's its lowest vibration. Cancer is about like being ultra protective, like my family or like not your family. There's this idea of like clanism, you know, so like this is part of where racism and prejudice comes in, like, right, like if I need to protect what's mine, otherwise there's not going to be enough for everybody, you know, like hoarding. That, like, even though hoarding is another archetype, but there's this idea in Cancer about like you don't belong, right? But its highest vibration of the Cancer archetype is that everybody belongs. We are creating safe spaces for everyone, safe communities for everyone. So you see how these two in Cancer, Capricorn, the nodal axes that I talked about earlier, we've moved from the Cancer Capricorn into the Gemini Sagittarius. Now, the Gemini Sagittarius energies that are coming out this year, specifically right now because of the full moon. The full moon is in Sagittarius right now, near the nodal axes. That's why we have eclipses when the moon is near the nodal axes. And then the sun is in Gemini right now. Okay. So with Sagittarius, let's go to Sagittarius, because Sagittarius, like Capricorn, they have this kind of like policing kind of energy at its lowest vibration. At its lowest vibration, like Sagittarians can be like super judgmental, super closed-minded, super prejudiced. You know, this is like kind of the law, where Capricorn is the law enforcement, Sagittarius is the law. It's also the ruler of like religion, man-made religions. And we can see that most of our current oppression that's, you know, started way back in the 1400s and before is because of basically patriarchal religious oppression and profiteering, right? Like, I mean, I hate to like just kind of like glaze over that, but like that's what it means to me, right? Does everybody agree with that, or am I just like on my soapbox, just like blah blah blah? Anyway, so, and Gemini, right? Gemini is probably like Scorpio, one of the most judged signs, but oh my gosh, Gemini is so beautiful, right? At the lowest vibration, Gemini is fake news, spreading rumors, speaking without knowing, being totally overwhelmed and not doing your work with finding the truth, and just like, fake news. Gemini, guess who's a Gemini? Our Cheeto in chief. I will not even say his name. All right. And he obviously is operating in the lowest vibration of Gemini. But then we have also these beautiful souls of Gemini. Like there's so many beautiful Gemini birthdays that like half of like my closest best friends are all Geminis. And I'm a Gemini rising. And the highest vibration is like curiosity and dialogue and understanding, right? So this polarity is getting activated right now just because of our eclipse cycle and our nodal axes, okay? And so you can see how these two sets of polarities of energies are working together. And then also the age of Aquarius. We are moving into the age of Aquarius at the end, well, some people, actually, Suzanne, you would consider that we are in the age of Aquarius, right? Tasha, yes, Gemini, happy birthday. So
yeah, there's
sorry, this scared me. Go, Suzanne.
I'm sorry, but you asked, do I consider Aquarius? Absolutely. Yes. I've thought about this a lot, and I think that the first sort of dawning of the age of Aquarius was in the 60s, and I can't remember why, but in my research there was that. Then there was like a second dawning with the internet age, when the internet was created.
Yep.
And now it just seems like it's getting more activated, and I think the truth is it's such a big shift that it's kind of happening in rolling waves. And I love how you put it here, Jupiter, Saturn, and Pluto, because absolutely I agree with you. Like that is going to continue to fire up the Aquarian energy. So it just takes time.
Yes, you reminded me about why the age of Aquarius actually gets accredited to the 60s. Every time Saturn goes into Aquarius, we'll be talking about this, there's this sense of revolution, right? Mm-hmm. But also because of the precession of the sky, like some people don't believe, like especially like Vedic astrologers don't believe in tropical astrology because the precession of where the sky is, we're like behind a sign, but that's very technical. We're not going to go into that, but because of the precession of the sky, we are actually, I believe, in the age of Aquarius, out of the age of Pisces. And I actually learned that from your teacher, Suzanne. So let's move on, because I want to dig in now that we have this kind of overarching understanding of all of the energies that are going on right now. Let's look at the history. Saturn Pluto conjunction, House of Cards, January 12th, 2020. Okay, here's the details. I have to put the details down here. Okay, so this happens every 33 years, not shocking. The last time was in 1982 to 83 when the US was in a severe economic recession, but that wasn't in Capricorn. The last time Saturn and Pluto conjunction was in Capricorn was in 1518. And this happened to coincide with the Protestant Reformation. And not being a Christian, I have to look it up. But for those of you that know about the Protestant Reformation, it was, Joanna, you're nodding your head. Maybe you can explain it better. Can you give us just a short recap of the Reformation?
Yeah, pretty much. And that also, like, too, was a lot of waves going on. Like Martin Luther nailing the thesis on the door and like essentially condemning a lot of Catholic practices that were going on at the time. And so there was a break within the church. You know, Catholic ruled the land, and then the Protestant Reformation happened, and then you have King Henry the Fifth in there with his wives and wanting to separate and divorce and all of that kind of accelerated some of this Reformation. So yeah, there was a lot of different moving pieces with it, but yeah, there was a lot of things going on during that period, and it was like a lot of big changing going on. Yeah, and in particular in the structure.
If I could add to one of the reasons of the Reformation and Martin Luther King, you know, creating this new structures, because in the Catholicism that ruled Europe at the time, before the Reformation, there was a ton of clergy abuse, a ton of greed, a ton of scandalous living. There was a ton of peasants who didn't have enough, very corrupt, very lavish living for the elite. Sound familiar? Right? Then we also have World War II, or World War I began. That wasn't in Capricorn. But you can see how when two planets meet, they are at the beginning of a cycle. So if you're familiar with moon phases, right? Like we all been working with moon phases here, right? We know that new moons are the beginning of a cycle where we plant intentions. So when we have two planets that have a conjunction, they have what is called like a synodic cycle. And so think about it as like one is the moon and one is the sun, and they're revolving around each other. And the conjunction is the beginning of the cycle, right? So Saturn-Pluto conjunction, this happened on January 12th. Now, if we think about, okay, we're in the full moon right now, like it, you know, in just a few minutes, we'll have the exactness of the full moon. What happens when Saturn and Pluto are now opposite each other? Because when you think of a full moon cycle, it's the opposition between the sun and the moon from our perspective on Earth. So if the beginning of the cycle is the conjunction, the opposite of this cycle is going to happen in 2035 and 2036. Now, I don't know what the heck is going to happen in 2035 or 36, but this has a lot of things to play out before then. The last time there was oppositions so we had the beginning of World War I in 1914, and some historians consider World War II not another world war, but just an extension of World War I. That happened during the opposition of Saturn-Pluto conjunction. 9/11 happened at the Saturn-Pluto opposition for the United States. So what we just have to notice here, it's like, okay, astrologers, there'll be predictive astrologers saying, okay, 2035, we'll have some kind of war, we'll have some kind of like, you know, famine or whatever expression. I'm not that kind of astrologer. I just want us to notice what is happening. How can we affect change so that we don't have to repeat that expression of Saturn Pluto? Okay, you guys here with me on that? I followed, you know, I'm really a bit nerdy, so there's a reference link about historical astrology that you'll have at the end that you can, like, if you so choose, you can like dig into. All right. Oh, you're so welcome, Joanna. You know, I find myself, I don't do these deep dives nearly enough, and I love it because I'm so nerdy. So I hope you guys are enjoying it too. Okay, so we are going to now look at the Jupiter-Pluto conjunction. Again, conjunction, beginning. Jupiter-Pluto conjunction happens every 12-ish years. The last time was December 2007. The last time it was in Capricorn was in 1771. And so there's another reference where I found all these historical things. In 1771, there was the Russian bubonic plague. There in 1981, there was the HIV epidemic. In 1918, we've all been hearing the correlations between the Spanish flu and coronavirus. Well, guess what? Jupiter and Pluto meeting up in Cancer. All right. And then one of the biggest ones in 1346, the Black Death.
They didn't overdo it.
Hi, Robin. So, you know, meaning, again, I don't know. Things that we can learn from it, I hope so. I don't really know what that is, but I just wanted to give you some historical context for this particular conjunction that we're having 3 times this year, right? The middle one being that's coming up on June 30th. Like, are we going to see a spike in cases, right, around the world? Maybe, maybe not. Are we going to have another shelter in place after December? Maybe, maybe not, right? Would I be surprised? No. Okay, then this last historical thing that I want to, well, 2 more historical things I want to talk about. Saturn and Jupiter, the Time Lords, okay, these meet every 20 years, and they actually form this like actually beautiful dance where they meet for about 200 odd years in a particular element before moving into a next one. Now, there are always an outlier. So even though Jupiter and Saturn will be meeting at the end of year in Aquarius, which is an air sign and very future forward thinking. We'll be talking about Aquarius coming up again. It had previously been meeting in earth signs. So the time lords of this kind of element is like really kind of like taking advantage of the earth. You know, we have the industrial age, we have all of this stuff that basically depleted all of our resources on the earth. Now what are we going to do? Right? In the 80s, they met in Libra, but that was one of the little outliers. Like the Jupiter and Saturn will always meet out of element in its cycle over 200 years in one particular element. Now, what's super, super interesting about this is that the last time Jupiter and Saturn, a new beginning, these are called the Time Lords for a reason. Jupiter and Saturn, they form a partnership, just like Venus and Mars, just like the Sun and Moon. These two elements energies are closely related. Jupiter, the expander, Saturn, the contractor. So what happens when they meet? Every 20 years, right? So the last time Jupiter and Saturn met in Aquarius was in 1405. And I had to look this up, and my scientist friend was like, maybe you should find less Eurocentric examples. But, you know, we live in a Western culture. And so in 1405, 615 years ago, the last emperor of Constantinople was born and instigated the beginning of the Renaissance. Okay, so this like complete, you can look at it as like the death of the old and a beginning of the new. So Jupiter and Saturn will continue meeting in the air signs until 2159. Well, we won't be alive then, but how will they say it then if the Earth is still alive, right? But this is super hopeful because as Jupiter and Saturn are meeting in the air signs, this is no longer about like the earth and practicality and building things. This is about the collective. This is air signs want to connect. It's about society, and Aquarius ideals humanity, innovation, futurism, science, technology, social equality, like all of these like wonderful things that like I would love to move towards, like environmental technologies. Like how wonderful would that be, right? So are you guys still with me here? Okay, good. So last little lecture piece. Saturn in Aquarius. Hope. I have a dream. Okay. We talked earlier about the age of the Aquarius and how all of these big planets are moving into Aquarius, but every time Saturn moves into Aquarius, and Saturn takes like almost 29 years to go to orbit around the sun. So it spends about 2.5 years in a sign. And the last time that Saturn was in Aquarius was in 2007. Before that, it was 1991. You know, and you can go all the way back, 1963, civil rights, Martin Luther King's speech, I have a dream, right? So yes, Saturn in Aquarius is about social movements. I love this so much, all right? So we'll get into some of the astrology. So 0 degrees Aquarius, yes, there's actually 3 people now that I know that have 0 degrees Aquarius. So at the end of the year, when Saturn and Jupiter like will play with your natal sun on top of your natal sun, think of it as like this totally brand new beginning for you. Like, right? This new social change on your own personal level, right? So just to recap, looking back at the astrology of the now, astrology of all of this that's happening, kind of see in a different light, huh? What's coming up for people? I hope you enjoyed that overview of 2020 and how we are smack dab in the middle of the year, what this means for your brand. I hope you are as excited as me to be a spiritual warrior during this revolution. It's an exciting time to be an entrepreneur, and we all must use our power and raise our voice in our brands. Again, if you want to purchase the entire replay, you can go to thesavvyluminary.com/revolution, or you can become a Patreon member at the Thought Leader Luminary level. As always, you are welcome to join my free Facebook group, The Savvy Luminary. It's a group of spiritual entrepreneurs using astrology to elevate their brands. And remember, Mercury retrograde is coming. We're not done yet with the cosmic shifts of 2020. I will be giving a special workshop called Mercury Retrograde Revival Guide. You can go to thesavvyluminary.com/Mercury to sign up for this upcoming workshop. And stay tuned at this podcast because our next episode will be all about this Mercury retrograde, because you don't need to freak the F out. Until then, see ya. Mahalo for listening to this brand new podcast. If you enjoyed learning about astrology for entrepreneurs, help me spread the word by sharing this podcast with your business besties, and hop over to The Savvy Luminary for links to episode notes and our free Facebook community where you can send me questions about astrology or branding, as well as connect with other like-minded businesses.